Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning.
So we've got some good stuff today. I hope everybody had to take a look at the attachments that I sent. Let's see, what do we have first? The updated list of African American landmarks. Tanya, you were going to talk about that?
Colette was. And that, right? We said we were going to do that, and I was going to talk about the grant. Okay.
Yes, so this is just an updated list of all of the existing Raleigh historic landmarks that have some relation to African American history. There are 3 on the list that were previously designated but have been demolished. We left them on there just as a continual reminder that they were in existence at one point in time, but those are italicized and the demolition is noted on there. But this is just a list that we've been maintaining. It hadn't been updated in a while, so it needed a little bit of a refresh. But just to show you what we currently have as designated.
Can I ask a question? How does that compare to overall historic designations? I mean, I looked at it, it's a fairly extensive list, but if, overall in Raleigh, our list is 25 times bigger, then it's not an extensive list.
So overall, we have about 170 landmarks designated. I did not count how many are on this list, but it's a smaller percentage.
Yeah, okay. Well, I didn't count it either, but I will. So you said 175 overall, okay.
Thanks, yeah.
I would add that the list also at the end includes the 2 historic overlay districts that are associated with African American history, specifically Moore Square historic overlay district. We did not include because it's not entirely African American history, although it does include that section of Hargett Street that we can, that was Raleigh's Black Main Street. So 2 out of our 8 historic overlay districts are specifically related, and that's a pretty decent percentage, certainly. So we had 5, and then since 2012 we've had 3 more. So our 2 newest historic overlay districts were African American. Prior to that, just Moore Square, and it looks like 1, 2. Oh, I see. We do include Moore Square under the National Register of Historic Districts. And then we've got 6 of the 28 National Register of Historic Districts. So that's a smaller percentage.
Staff, can one of you let me know the exact number of landmarks that we have? I've wanted to know that for a while. Or point me in a direction where I can find it.
Me? We're pointing at me for the number.
Anyone?
Yeah, no, you don't know this. It's 170 something. It's like around 174. The database was broken for about 6 months, and I'm just now getting it going again. Colette found the magic question to ask the IT people to get an old version back up. With de-designations and a few removals, and turns out there's some duplicates. I don't know the exact number. I think you could safely say 173 at this point, but I am eager to get the exact number as well.
Okay.
It normally lives on that one page in the rhdc.org.
Go ahead, Tanya.
I was going to say, I think in addition to the list, we were going to talk a little, you wanted to hear just what other research had been done generally on African American history in Raleigh. Colette's going to talk a little bit about Culture Town and how we got there. Both of us are coming at this from it happened before our time. So it's reading what information we have on hand. But we was going to mention also in searching for some other things, we also, not specifically related to Culture Town, but other studies that have been done. There's a context on method. There is a unfinished report, draft report on Stronach's Alley. And I can't remember why we didn't finish that. It may have been a funding issue. And there is a little bit of work, an inventory of the College Park Idlewild area, which is, but even when we did that, it was determined to not, at that time, the state determined there was not sufficient resources left for them to have a historic district, which is why we did a few of those individual designations, which was the same strategy for Oberlin. It was not eligible for the National Register, so they were individual landmarks designated. And then there was a study funded by RHDC by Richard Matson on African American history that might have been during the same time as the Cultural Town and Raleigh Roots, but I'll stop and let Colette talk about that. What did you find?
Not substantially more than what you just said. So prior to Culture Town was an oral history project called Raleigh's Roots. From what we have in the files, for some reason, our part 2 is missing. We have supposed to have 3 PDFs from what I can tell, part 1, part 2, and part 3, but we have a part 1 and part 3, but I'm not entirely sure where part 2 has ended up. But essentially, in 1985, the city council at the time requested that the RHDC, or RHPC at the time, study Raleigh's Black communities. According to this document, the request was because they felt that a significant portion of Raleigh's citizens' history hadn't been explored, which is probably very accurate. So they asked us to undertake the study, and the commission combined with the SHPO and essentially decided on an oral history project. The Richard Harrison Library has a copy of this project, from what I can tell. There were 12 cassettes made, and there was a presentation in, I think, 91 is when this project finished. I believe that we got a grant from the National Trust for Raleigh's Roots, as well as we worked with the Southern Oral History Program at UNC, which I'm not sure, is that still a program? I didn't look it up. And we also got support from the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation, which is a pretty good combination of grant support for this project. but interviews were made of the community. I have not entirely figured out yet how the interviews conducted in this project morphed into Culture Town. I don't know if they're the same interviews.
So it just occurred to me, what I'm going to do is set up a meeting with Dan Becker, who was here when all of that happened.
While I was reading, I was thinking, man, I would love to talk to Dan because he is mentioned many times in all of these documents.
Okay. Yeah, that was one of the first projects he was involved with when he came to the city. I think it was 1985 or 1986 when he came and started working with the city. So why don't you, Colette, reach out and set up a WebEx or Teams meeting or something with you, me, and Aaron okay, we'll get with the research committee. We will do it with the research committee. We'll find a time and let him talk
I'm not
about it.
trying to interlope in anything I shouldn't, but I got to tell you, I've been trying to do a lot of background research on this stuff, and I would love to learn more and do whatever I can to help facilitate capturing that history for our city. And I'm not asking you guys to take it on because I respect how busy you are, but I just think there's so much of it. I mean, the fact that Oberlin isn't, I'm just stunned by that because anyway, but I just want to capture as much as I can and maybe coalesce it in a place that the committee can, and you can have it for future generations because it is our legacy. And seems like there's been efforts to accommodate it, but maybe not one, and maybe it hasn't, maybe, this meeting will help, but I'm glad to do whatever you want me to do if that makes sense.
Yeah. We'll invite everybody if you want to listen. I think the idea was that staff would talk to him, get the history, and then come back and share with you. I mean, this is our job. We need to know what we have done and have it all together. And I think that will be critical in, moving forward with requesting a grant. I mean, Culture Town was published by RHDC and is the, only document. I mean, that is the go-to in Raleigh's African American history when it comes to the architecture. And I think what we want to do is sort of do the next step. And there was something else I was going to say. Oh, something you said. I think the other thing as we think about these projects, it's I said I wasn't going to talk much. Anyway, is we've got is how are we going to tell the story? Particularly as looking at our committee, we are extremely white. So of course, reaching out to the other people, on the commission, but we have the, academic, requirements for National Register listing, that is what it is, but we have a lot of flexibility in local designations. Granted, they do come with the regulatory piece to it, but we have more flexibility in what is, what has special significance to Raleigh. So we use the National Register as a guide, but not, strictly speaking, we, or you as the commission, and then the community and, ultimately city council gets to, decide, what has that special significance in order to have the local designation. I think what would be helpful if Susan would be, what else is out there that RHDC didn't do that we may not know about? Does that make sense? Because there was a woman who gave a presentation at the Planning Commission recently, and I regret that I can't remember her name, that she has a history blog on Raleigh's African American history, and I'd never heard of her. So however we structure, the next project, knowing the right people to talk to is going to be important.
I did learn that the Raleigh's Roots project was inspired or modeled after the Black Women Physicians Project, which was a project from the Women's Institute in DC and the Medical College of Pennsylvania, and is housed in the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress, which seemed pretty cool. I don't know how. Someone must have known that it was happening because it wasn't finished until '89. So I think that's an interesting connection.
Is now a good time to share what I learned about the grant?
So far, oh, I can, yeah, sure, if you want. Is that me, to me? Yes?
I was asking Ian as our quiet leader.
Sorry, I'm not quiet. Sorry, Ian, you have to interrupt me. I'm just.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I spoke again, or no, I emailed with the State Historic Preservation Office asking if there had been any other studies done in the state on civil rights history specifically, and there has not been a lot. No, I take that back. We talked about civil rights. There are. I did get the example from Greensboro in Transylvania County. I asked about builders and architects and that kind of thing. And the only ones that they're aware of was in Greensboro. The survey work did focus on modernist architects in Greensboro, and with NCA A&T was the program that trained Black architects in North Carolina, and so they ended up with that there. There is a Black architect, John C. Norman, who has done some work in North Carolina. They found some in Oxford, and then she suggested that we reach out to Catherine Beischer because she has done a lot of research over the years, and we can. Hers thus far, as we know, her research has been limited to the 19th century, so it's earlier. So we shouldn't discount that, but that is what I learned. So there's not anyone that we know yet that has focused on 20th century Black builders and architects. From a timing standpoint, if you wanted to apply for a historic preservation fund grant, the application deadline is April 16th. There is a city process where before we can even apply for the grant, we go to the grants committee and ask, with the application saying, this is what we want to apply the grant for. This is approximately how much it's going to cost. It's a matching, it's not a matching. And then the committee says whether or not we can actually apply for the grant. I see no reason why they would say no, as long as we have the funds for it. But they do actually meet weekly. So that don't have a huge time crunch worrying about that. I did not get as far as I intended in drafting the scope of work because in part I was pulling together the bits and pieces of what we know from the various nomination forms and designations out there so that we can better define what work needs to be done next, because we do have the survey work that resulted in Culture Town. Where I see a bit, and then we do have four, I think it's four, oh yeah, we just saw them, four neighborhoods that are African American related that we have already identified through just the general 1945 65 architectural survey, but that was residential. So we definitely have a gap in anything. I mean, well, we have a gap generally for anything that is non-residential. Oh, sorry. There is a study out there that we do not have a copy of, didn't focus on African Americans, that Ruth Little and Jenny did for the State Historic Preservation Office a couple of years back. That was mitigation for a bank, modernist bank being torn down. Anyway, so what we don't have are what other neighborhoods we might have missed, and we don't have anything that is looking, and I confirmed when I talked about last time, we don't have anything that's talking about, you know, what was happening socially, you know, during the time period of, you know, it's huge, like 1938 to 1970, and then buildings that are associated with events in that time period. So that is where I'm seeing there is a clear gap. So that is the direction that my proposed scope is going, and I won't wait until next month, because next month is already April, but I will email it out to y'all to look at. I feel, and y'all can decide, I think there's a bigger project to be had here. And I think, but I also think that starting and doing, you know, something to sort of put your foot in the water, find the right analogy, might be the way to go, and then look at collaborating with other entities out there to come up with a bigger project. Because there are other city initiatives, some big, some small, that are happening related to African American history. And I think I'd like to see if there's a possibility to collaborate. Now I'm going to stop.
So what are the next steps, Tanya?
I need to, well, I need to hear from you if you want to pursue this, for sure. And then I would send a rough scope out to a handful of known architectural historians. This wouldn't be the RFP, but this would just be a quick and dirty. Hey, how much, you know, roughly do you think this would cost? Take that in combination with the, you know, numbers that we got from the state, from other grant projects, to come up with a rough budget, and to fill out the form and get permission from the city to apply for the grant, you know, with a scope. The detailed scope of work would come later with the state if the grant is awarded. What I like about this is it would be a very quick, discrete project. I mean, now it will come up and say, you need to do more of this also, but the timing is application in April, and shoot, I think the selection in May, contract signed in June, draft, nearly final draft, if not the final draft, due at the end of August, because they're working on a fiscal year of October to September. And so, and that would give them the final month to wrap it up. So it's not something that will drag on and is nice and discreet. So those are the next steps. Do you want me to, do you want staff to pursue this and, you know, provide you, assuming, I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm discombobulated this morning. But you would okay the final scope before we submit the application.
It sounds good to me.
I agree.
So this is specific to architectural research, right? Is that what you said?
Right, right.
So we're carving that out. We were originally talking about potentially expanding it to be more inclusive of not just architecture, but you're saying, so I guess my question is, if we do that, Ian, then what do we get, and then what do we do next? Because I feel like there's a lot of wonderful one-offs that you all have done over the years, and this could be another really good documentation for us. But then where does it go? Because I've heard over and over us continue to ask the same question. How do we handle the historic value of the African American community in Raleigh, both architecturally and through building and I guess monuments and things. So I guess I don't want to say yes, which I can understand from the committee that this is an important action, without knowing how it becomes part of what you suggested, Tanya, with more activities that are going on. You're right, the city's doing a ton of this now, and there's a lot of research being done. How do we build that kind of thing? And are we the people who are supposed to be raising a flag about that, or how, or not? So I don't know. And I guess I just don't want it to be another one-off. That's
so, I mean, I'll let you, do you want me to, I have words I want to say, but I'm not the committee. Ian, do you want to answer that, and then I can use my words?
You go ahead, Tanya.
Okay. The first thing I want to say, doing architectural inventory and focusing on the built environment, whether it be landscapes and all that, that is what RHDC does. That is the mission. That is how we tell, you know, the story of Raleigh. We will always be doing architectural inventories. You know, that is one of the primary core pieces of the mission. That is so that's always going to happen. What I would like to see, and I agree with you, is how can we coordinate with other entities, whether RHDC ends up taking a bigger role like they did with, we did a long time ago with Culture Town, or we coordinate with the City of Raleigh Museum, or yesterday afternoon at City Council, Councilman Branch asked the Human Relations Commission to look at doing something about African American history. So maybe, that's the commission that takes the lead role. So telling the history of all things Raleigh is, as I've understood it, is outside of the scope of what we do. We tell the history of Raleigh using what's physically on the ground, left. And if it turns out there's a lot of things gone, then we look at how we tell it more. But we're also learning how to better tell the story. And let me back up. We do need to connect with the people whose story that we're telling. become more people focused. And I think doing the oral histories is one way of doing that. And I think we will need to collaborate with a number of entities to make that happen and make for it to be authentic. And we're all out there learning how best to do this. I listened to an interesting webinar last night about some research in Philadelphia, and that was sort of one of the pieces that the researcher was acknowledging that she's a academic white female, and she's coming at it from a genuine standpoint, but there's always the worry, should I be the one telling the story? So we need to be very conscious of that, but that doesn't negate, I mean, we still have to do the architectural inventory, even if we come up with a bigger project. My intent is to help y'all craft a larger project, but have that happen while we get started on the inventory. Sort of have that running in the background. Because once we get going, it's consultants that are doing that work. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, I wasn't at all suggesting we run it, because clearly that's not our role. Our role is architectural. But I was thinking about, I'm working on with a group of young people, Gen Z and millennials, who are focused on lots of the history of Raleigh coming from different communities and different perspectives. And one of them is a young man named Greer Webb, who you may know. He's been profiled during Black History Month a fair amount. And one of his strongest commitments is to build awareness for the African American community in Raleigh. And I'm wondering if we do this and we get our project, which is what our role is in this. If we don't, and as you suggested, maybe I can do this. I can do some research, or Colette suggested, I remember who, and talk with Greer. I'm sure he knows the woman you're talking about who had the Black history work done. He's been a phenomenal resource for building awareness for the African American community in this area. And he's, I think, 18, or no, I'm sorry, I think he's 21 now. He was 18 when we started our work. So he's really the next generation, which I also think we need to reach out to. I feel like not only is this committee white, but it's also needs to be more integrated with younger people, and we're beginning to see that, and I think that's wonderful. So, with your permission, I'll reach out to Greer and say, hey man, what's this about, and do you know anything, and what do you think about what we can bring? Because I know he's very involved, as is Zainab Baloch, about what's happening in Southeast Raleigh right now. They're very involved in that. So there's a lot of things they say that, I think to myself, well, as a historic committee, what do we know about Southeast Raleigh? And, seems to be sort of a gap there because they're doing the research. So, and maybe there isn't, but I'd like to, if I can, you're right, I'm an old white lady, so take it from where it's coming. But, I think nothing happens if we don't put it out there, and I'm willing to take take on the challenge and put it out if you want me to, or if I can help, and see what comes back. See if there is, as I mentioned earlier, there's a national grant for African American community research, and it is all about architectural history. That group I talked about is buildings. So they're very similar to us, and they're national, and they're for African Americans. And I was thinking, wow, maybe they would help us in Raleigh too. You know, maybe we could approach a group like that, and they would help us think about, you know, using their fund to help preserve the history and architecture and process here. That's what they do. And it's strictly African American driven, and it's national. So I'm glad to put together some thoughts on it if you all want me to. And see, I may come up with nothing, but I'm glad to at least take the step to see if there is something out there that we can bring to the city and they can build from, because I think we have to help at this point. You know, we've been part of the you know, the efforts to date, and we need to shift and help the efforts going forward. So,
I mean, I think knowing what else is happening out there will better help, you know, you figure out where you're going to fit. So if you can, you know, whether it's reaching out to Greer or, you know, how, you know, what other connections you have, you know, do some sleuthing and let us know what other projects are underway or on the horizon, or people that we should be connecting with in the community. I think that would be great to know. What's the name of that grant again?
this is the one I heard on NPR. It's the African American Cultural Activation Preservation Fund, and it is all about buildings. I
Was
mean,
it Brent?
He was talking.
Was it Brent Leggs, the speaker on NPR? Brent?
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you hear it?
Yeah. No, but that's the National Trust. That's the trust.
Right. And he was so clear about preserving historic structures and buildings and their funding and coming into communities. So what I suggested, Colette, I don't know if you want to, before we started our meeting, I suggested to Tanya, you know, maybe there's a way to invite an organization like that to look at Raleigh as kind of a central historic perspective, and, you know, do some, help us, because they've done it before. It's not like we have to learn it and do it and figure it out. Let's use their knowledge and experience to help us do what we're trying to do here. And I didn't know if that was feasible or doable. And again, you know, I'm glad to call anybody, because
Yeah.
I know how to do it.
Yeah, we can look into that. I mean, usually with the National Trust grants, it's the same as you apply for any other grant. We write the scope, we send it to them, they tell us if they agree, and then they give us.
But this is a specific separate fund. It's not the national, it's the preservation.
No, the National Trust for Historic Preservation has a lot of separate discrete funds.
This is specifically the African American Cultural Activation Preservation Fund. And it's funded, my understanding was it's funded separately and differently. And he's really been, we can do I mean, I'm sure the grant application is exactly the same, you're right. But the reality of what they support and how they do it, I mean, his mission is to travel the country and figure out where we've not been supporting the African American history and architectural and structures. And I just thought, wow, that's sort of what we're struggling with as a committee right now. So could we ask him, how do we do this as a city? Or maybe his organization, and they'd come back and say, okay, here's an outline of, and it might make us a lot, it might help us a lot. I figured they do it. So I always am interested in talking to people who've done it before, because we're trying to figure it out. And I know we've done a lot of good work. I just think we're at this precipice where we could learn from, it's what literally he's been doing.
So I think for that one, if you could go to the Trust website and see what they've already funded, what communities, that would be helpful.
Sure.
So
okay,
yeah.
I can do that. So I can talk to Greer and some people from his organization and his world, and then I can reach out to this African American cultural, and I can come back on our next meeting and tell you all. Would that be okay? Is that okay, Ian?
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you, Susan.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you, Susan, for doing that.
And Susan, I went and tried to search for that specific grant fund to see if it's a different one that we aren't already aware of. And I didn't get any hits for it on Google, but the one that Brent runs is the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund. So I put a link to that in the chat.
That's the one I sent. That's it. Yes, you're right. So it is Brent. Yes. Thank you.
Aaron, can you say that name again?
The African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund through the National Trust.
So the African American Cultural Activation Preservation Fund, that's not the,
Well, that's what they said. That's what they said on NPR. So I think that what Aaron is suggesting is in the, when you go Google it, that's what came up. But I'll look them both up because on NPR, I wrote it down verbatim, African American Cultural Activation Preservation Fund.
okay.
So this is not that different, the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund. So
I'm
Yeah.
pretty certain that they're the ones who funded the Polly Murray project in Durham and the Nina Simone. I think they contributed to that as well.
Yes, that is the case.
Okay. Are you ready to move on? Tanya, do you have an update on the Lightner Brothers study? Is that still going?
I thought you said stop and wait, so it's not gone anywhere.
Or maybe I don't remember. Okay.
But I mean, they're ready to go. I mean, and actually, there's even a purchase order if I'm given the okay to pull the trigger to do that first. You know, they came back with the scope that they would do, you know, in some initial research, and then come back to you before moving forward. I was given the impression last month that you wanted to hold on that. We've got the funds to move forward if you would like for them to do the first portion of it. I just have to email Jason and say, go.
Okay, let me look back on last month and I'll let you know.
Okay.
The next thing I have is the potential landmarks list. I hope everybody had to take a look at that. If anybody, does anybody have any suggestions for priorities other than what I listed? Okay, staff, can we start the process of drafting those letters to the property owners that I highlighted?
Those are the ones in red.
Yes.
Could we add Char-Grill to it? That's a personal preference. I don't know if we want to expand.
I thought I had highlighted Char-Grill, but maybe I didn't. In any case, I meant to.
Players Retreat is in there, which I definitely agree with as well.
Yeah, I tried to include some of what I considered to be endangered properties, as well as some outside the Beltline and a few African American related landmarks. Yeah. So what's the process that we need? I need to sign them. Is that correct, Tanya?
So typically what we've done is for each letter that goes out, it is signed, and we can, you know, do it electronically if you want, if you're comfortable giving us, you know, your signature to plop on there. Certainly, you know, a commissioner's name is on there as who it's coming from. And the various buildings are, you know, assigned or requested by commissioners. So you would, you know, be responsible, that person would be responsible for following up with the property owner, you know, after some time to say, hey, did you get the letter? Did you have any questions? So that is, it doesn't have to be that way. You know, you can do, your name can be on all of them, but the way it has traditionally been done is that each letter came from, you know, one of the three of you, and that is your role, is to, you know, be the the fellow citizen reaching out to talk about historic landmark designation, and we can, provide the talking points and, pros and cons if you're not familiar with it. And then they can always come to staff if they've got other questions.
Are either one of you, Katie or Susan, are you willing to do that, or would you rather my name be on all of them?
I'm very willing to do that for sure.
I'm
That'd be
fine.
help.
Okay.
No, for whatever's easier for you, doesn't matter.
So Colette, do you want to go through the list and see if we can get us some volunteers for them?
Yes. Let me reopen it. It's going to be a slow computer day, I can tell. All right. So to start, the community deli.
I can take that one.
And above that is Char Grill.
Got it. So the Char Grill.
You're
Okay.
cutting in and out for me, so I'm not exactly even sure what I'm glad to help, but am I writing? I don't know exactly what. So I'm sorry.
You just volunteered to have your signature on some letters. You do not have
That's
to
what I
write the letters.
thought. Well, you can pick whichever ones you want. I mean, I'm fine with, I don't really know most of these locations. As I went through the list, I'm glad to support us getting information, and I respect that the list was put together with knowledge of what the building or architectural structure was.
I can take Char Grill.
The Crosby Garfield School.
I've done a ton of work with schools. You can put my name on it.
Yeah, I'll look back to that one. We'll want to, and actually a couple of these others that we've reached out to before will indicate that, coming back to you again. Because we've been trying, we haven't tried in probably 10 years, but we tried before to get Crosby Garfield.
Do you remember if we've tried to get Lincoln Theater before?
We have not.
Okay. I think that one's pretty important to Landmark, but.
The Milner Building, also known as Cameron Park Apartments.
I can take that one.
The Kuntz Furniture Store. Ian, and then Lincoln Theater. Ian. Pittysmont.
Definitely want that one.
Players Retreat. I know that we did this one a couple years ago.
Okay.
I'm glad to do that. They know me, actually. So.
Oh, good.
So you can.
You want to fight for it, or?
No, I don't want to.
You can take it.
Okay.
Susan.
And the Harrison Library.
I'll take it. Love libraries.
Yeah.
Oh, and the Montague Turner House. Is that the last one? My personal favorite is the Mary Norwood House on Spring Forest Road.
I was going to ask about that. Can you get? I couldn't find anything on that, and I wasn't sure why it was on the list. Can you educate me?
Yeah, actually, I'm not sure why that is blank here, but I researched that one. Let me pull up the other list. The Norwoods owned a lot of the land in that area,
Hmm.
and let's see. That house has been surveyed. Let's see here. But every time I drive by it, I have a little bit of panic that it won't still be there.
So which one is that?
It's on Spring Forest Road,
Well,
right?
what's the name? What are we
It's the
calling
Mary
it?
Norwood.
Okay, thank you.
It's a 1945-ish house. It was surveyed, I'm assuming as part of Lewisburg Road project at one point. But it's right next to a Food Lion and a gas station. It's just like a perfect little island of former rural Raleigh, surrounded by scary things.
The other two that you have highlighted, Ian, are the William T. Smith House and the Upchurch House.
Yes.
Who wants those?
I'll take the Upchurch house.
I can take the remaining, the William T. Smith.
And one more that I'm not sure is on the list, but popped into my head is the, and I don't know that I'm remembering it properly, but it isn't on the list, but the,
This is not the
OD
complete list. I'm not really sure what
Okay.
happened.
okay, the
We'll have to
OTK
merge.
house, the seamstress,
Yes,
and I know that,
that one's definitely on the other list.
okay. The African American seamstress, the State Museum had an exhibit on her, and I think they're actually doing, I feel like they've done something recently digitally as well.
Tanya, you were breaking up a little bit. Can you tell me that
Oh,
landmark again?
the ODK house,
Oh, right. Yeah.
yeah, I think if we're looking at African American,
I know. Let me look at the map. I'll be able to point
It's
it
on
out for you.
Edenton, right?
Yes.
Right. Colette, you said that this wasn't the entire list.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what has happened, but there is a longer list. Yes.
Oh. I don't think I deleted anything.
Yeah, no, I do not think it is anything that you did.
I wanted to delete something.
Can somebody provide me with a little bit of background on Pittiesmont?
It was, well, it is a arts and crafts house on Van Dyke, but it predates Van Dyke actually. So it was one of the first houses in that area. The professor who lived in it was a professor at State, and when they put Van Dyke through, they wanted to name the road after him, but he didn't want the road named after him apparently, because he was humble. But instead, he said that they could name it after his beard, and he had a big, long Van Dyke style beard. That's the legend of where Van Dyke comes from. I'm not sure if it's true or not, but I like the house a lot, and I think it's a very early house in the neighborhood, so I thought it was
I've
worth-
requested it with frequency and it's clearly in the, what is now the public right of way. So it
Right.
stands out. Is he also the person that gave his house a name? Sounds like maybe he would have.
I think so.
The OTK house is 904 Newbern.
Newbern, okay. I'm in favor of sending a letter to that one as well.
Who wants to attach their name to it?
It looked like Ian raised his hand.
I got it.
Colette, can you send me the longer list that you have?
Yes.
And I'll try to maybe merge the two if you want, or maybe, or I don't, you can or whatever. But I want to make sure this list is, there's one of them and it's comprehensive, you know?
Yes.
Cool. Anything else? Okay, well, thanks everybody. Talk soon.
Thank you.